and I will give the floor, first of all, to Professor Henrique Barros. He will be our first speaker. Henrique Barros, he's a doctor, he's an epidemiologist. He works for National Health Council. He's the president of the National Health Council and the president of the Public Health Council also. So thank you, Professor, for having accepted to be here with us, for having accepted to give us a general overview on the importance of research in prison settings. So thank you for being here. So can I share my screen? Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those listening here, and I wish you a great day. Those that are following us at in different time zones, so thank you also, and those that will see us later on, so I greet you also, and in a very, very warm way I would like to greet all those present here, and especially Filipa. I would like to greet Filipa in a special way for the great work she has been conducting. Now, first of all, I would like to say that research in prison settings is absolutely critical in our activity. Not only in our specific case that we are connected to health and public health, but even par excellence it is what defines our modern times. The fact that we can think based on or think about what we do, and so in that sense it would be unthinkable of to work or to organize the prison context, which is a very specific context, the prison world, which is a very specific world in terms of its anthropological position within our societies over centuries now, and also from the sociological point of view, and also from the health point of view. So with this I want to say that when we think about research in prison settings, we should go beyond just the use of health keys, or those keys that are connected to health, even if the result we are looking for is health results. If we just limit ourselves to using the common instruments in our health practice and in our art of health, we would just be limiting and will remain limited. Now, the prison population is a very specific type of population, considering their characteristics as a set of individuals, but also as a dynamics, because it is above all a situation where power relationships and inequalities are particularly felt and seen. But it corresponds to a large number of people. And Portugal, as you can see here, it's somewhere here in the middle, has a population of inmates, of prisoners, that stands somewhere in the middle. If we consider these 20 countries in the EU with the greater number of inmates, but it's also interesting to see that we have this almost this geographical organization of prisoners that has to do with political regimes, with the history of countries. So this relationship between the number of inhabitants, so we see here the prison population per 100,000 inhabitants. Now, we don't have time to dwell on that now, but when we speak about prison population, we are talking mostly about a population that is a male population. The proportion of males, or the disproportion between the number of men and women in prisons, is impressive, is great. And this makes us think also and research also the causes of this inequality in terms of gender, this gender differences. Now, research is also important. This is another reason why research is so important. Now, let me recall the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. It is very important that these Sustainable Development Goals are not lost or forgotten when people are in prison settings, and in the countries where prison is seen, especially mostly as a moment in someone's journey or life, and not a way of life. And it has an important role, for instance, like in the Portuguese case, in the rehabilitation of the individual and in the preparation of the individual for again living a life fully integrated in society, which is the best at each point in time, which changes over time. So it is very important that the time one is in prison is seen and is used to ensure that these Sustainable Development Goals are fulfilled in an easier way. And we are talking about many people that individually, at that point in time, while they are in prison, these people have friends. While they're in prison, we know that they have friends, they have family, they have a network of social relationships. And so not only those that are there in prison, but all those that are affected by that person that is in prison. So knowing these paths, researching these paths is absolutely critical for us to be able to improve things. We need to understand what leads someone into prison, always bearing in mind or having as a backdrop the idea of being incarcerated, of being excluded from society is an old idea from an old period, and even in Europe here many years ago or centuries ago, it was a way of exercising power and has a very close relationship to another type of incarceration, which was the exclusion of people with mental disease or with some sort of health issue. So we have to think why this has been so or was so. Just very quickly, I just want to show you a few more figures. This is from two Portuguese prisons in two different moments. One in 2005. It was a concern that we had to understand what was going on with the prevalence of HIV, which was very, very prevalent at that time. Almost 10% of women and 9% of men that were in these prisons, they were affected by HIV, and they were living with this infection. And it was different, or could be different, the frequency of HIV according to the countries where the person was living, but it was not just HIV that was prevalent, but we can see other sexual transmissible infections, as you can see here on this graph. So for us to get to know about this, we don't need research in the academic point of view, or from the academic point of view, or programmatic point of view. We can we conduct it from the clinical point of view, or medical point of view, which is to understand what's going on with people. But this brings up issues in terms of freedom, access to information, privacy, and we should not forget. Now, another problem that was important. I'm sorry, the slide is in Portuguese for the English speakers. It is the proportion of people that were injecting drugs during their lives and even during their time in prison. So this is a topic that would need deep research for us to understand how to respond to it. Now, being imprisoned or having stayed in prison, in a prison, or stayed for some time, or somehow having been somehow connected to gestures, actions considered as criminal to some extent, is associated to a larger mortality, to much larger mortality rate. These are data, English data, but the question that needs answers, and it's not an easy answer, is why the people die more. Is it because they were imprisoned, or are there conditions that lead people to be prison and then worsens their likelihood of survival or of living for a longer period, or what is the way of interaction between these things, and how is it possible to improve? Now, if we look, unfortunately we don't have these data for Portugal, but if we look at the US, this is the overall US population, and you see with COVID, both the incidence of COVID and mortality associated with COVID is much, much higher in the prison population than in the general population. So here we could say that incidence would be higher because the crowding conditions, the overcrowding conditions, and the closeness is much greater in prisons, but it's probably not just that, and so we need to understand this. So in brief, I would say that, as I started, it is absolutely critical that we are able to research in order to understand what goes on with people that spend time in prison, that are for a long period in prison, and also people that work with these people in prisons. The health in prison settings is not just the health of those that are imprisoned, but it's also the health of all those that are lead their life in prisons, that live their lives in prisons. And I would even risk to say or highlight 4 important points in terms of research: mental health, aging. We have very old prisons or inmates in Portugal, then communicable diseases or infectious diseases, and then the issues of suicide. So these are the general issues. These are not just Portuguese issues, but it would be important for us to conduct a monography of this in terms of health. And then also recall that research must go beyond health also. And here we have other issues, and please allow me to say that here is where we have more difficult issues. So can we conduct observational research? Can we conduct quasi-experimental research? And can we conduct experimental research with interventions? These are questions. So what part of rights, guarantees, or the capacity for determination is withdrawn from people that are imprisoned? Why the journey for a better dignification of the person and why the fact that the person is in prison allows us to then enter into people's lives, or intrude into people's lives without knocking at their doors. So, but without research, we don't know how to act. We don't know what is the best way of acting. Without research, we don't know what works and what does not work. The huge difficulty is finding a balance point, a midterm, so that we can conduct research for people, for improving things, and finally, and probably it is through research in prisons that participative research, so the presence of the research parties in design and in the results is absolutely critical for us to not override people's rights, guarantees, and privacy. So, because the only thing we take away from someone who is imprisoned is their freedom to circulate, and but we cannot take away their dignity and so many other rights they have. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you, Professor Henrique Barros. So he addressed two very important topics for the rest of our session. One is the studying the population of inmates and how to design studies to conduct research in prison settings, and also the main challenges that we have because we don't have for epidemiological studies of people in prison settings, and what are the challenges, and these are the challenges also that we will launch in the second moment to the next speakers. To also help us answer these questions we have and that Professor Henrique Barros has shared with all of us. Does anyone have a question? I can see in the chat there seems to be no question. So I want to remind you that everyone can ask their questions through the chat or by raising your virtual hand during the conference, and then we will give the floor directly to the person raising their hand. Okay, so now we will move to Filipa Costa. We'll give her the floor. She is a consultant in the field of prison health for WHO, and she will speak about a program, Health in Prisons program by the WHO. So, Filipa, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for having helped us organize this session. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank you very much for your kind words, but for us, WHO, it has been a privilege to work with ISPUP. So on behalf of the WHO, I want to thank you all for this opportunity that was given to us and to speak at this seminar of what goes on in terms of health in prisons. I'm a consultant for this program, HIPP. I have here with me the Marina Santos, who is the consultant manager. So this program was established in 1994, so some years ago, and the main goal is to improve health of people that are deprived from their liberty in their freedom in countries. This was already mentioned by Professor Henrique Barros, but putting a number, it is estimated that we have 11 million people imprisoned in the whole world, and just in Europe they represent 1.5 million of people. Now, our program is in line with the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that have been already mentioned, and especially SDG 10 and 3. All the work done by WHO focused on programs, and we are contributing towards two programs. One is the general program of work that applies in the whole world, and the European program of work just for Europe. Both programs have the main goal of improving coverage in health, and specific targets have been established. One is to increase the population that is covered in 1 million people. So we hope to achieve this goal, and we don't want to deprive people or exclude people that are deprived from freedom. Now, what we want to achieve through this goal is what we have here, the five work pillars. So the first pillar has to do with the work that we try to do to try to improve both policy and legislation to improve prisons' health. The second pillar has to do with monitoring the health of people in prisons. The third has to do with capacity building processes in member states aimed at health professionals working in prison settings. The fourth pillar has to do with supporting evidence-based knowledge in this field, and this is why we take part in this program. And then the fifth pillar, which is very important to us, strengthening the interface between prisons' health systems and the wider national health systems. Now, what I want to show you is some examples of what we have been doing in these various pillars. Of course, there's much more to say, but time does not allow us. I will just give you a few examples of the first pillar. We develop a lot of work related to governance of health in prisons. So the first program was developed with _HIPP, that is also present in this webinar, and basically what we do is to advocate for the model that we consider the best for the provision of health care in prisons, in prison settings in the 21st century, based on a predominance of the Ministry of Health. And then we have also tried to describe different models that are being implemented throughout Europe. In this research, in this report that you see in the middle, there are several countries involved: Finland, United Kingdom, and Portugal. Portugal under the Ministry of Health, and we have a model through the cooperation between the health and justice ministries, we can ensure that the population, the imprisoned population, receives the same health care that the general population. Another work that we developed in this field has to do with the continuity of care. So, as was said by Professor Henrique Barros, people don't stay in prisons for their whole life. So, at least during the period of transition, they don't have a lack of access to health care. And this is what is shown here by this third report here. In the field of information and in health, this is a field that we consider as central to the entire program, and especially because this is a field in which there is, let's say, a black hole, I would say, because despite the fact that there's data, published data by several organizations, like the bar graph that Professor Henrique showed, we actually know very little about what goes on in prison settings in a detailed way, and we want to have broken down information. The situation is very critical. So what we did in 2016 was to set up a database, and this database tries to provide indicators to help us assess the health condition of people in prisons in Europe, and some indicators connected to what goes. Now, this database says the ministry. I must say that her sound. I'm sorry, but the sound sometimes is cut. So here in this third report, we have more detailed information on the various countries. Over these last years, we have improved the way information is gathered, and we set up a model or a structure that can help us assess in a more detailed way the health condition of people and the performance of the health system in prisons. which is this report that we have on the far right, the WHO Prison Health Framework. And it is based on this that we have been collecting the information. We are now analyzing the data. I'm sorry, I can't hear every now and then what she says. Now, throughout this last year, or almost 2 years, many efforts were, most efforts were channeled to the pandemics, of course, and then since March 2020, we have also developed a guidance, we at WHH, to work on the control of COVID-19 in prisons and in other places of detention. So here we have the main principles of this guidance. They are based on all the main principles of the WHO, but then some of these measures or norms are adapted specifically to prison settings. They have been changed through their after their launching, and here we can see that they can be complemented with other documents that try to transpose theory into practice. And I'm speaking specifically about this checklist that you can see on the right, which is a form that was prepared for clinical directors of prisons, and to see how can they adapt these standards into the prisons. This is for self-assessment. The countries can or not share their data with WHO. The important thing is that they have a mechanism to see how can they improve their capacity to intervene in terms of health with within prisons. Now, here, one of the recommendations is to involve more the people that are deprived from their freedom. So we have prepared all these books, not only to convey the information to inmates, but also to visitors, to their visitors. Another work that we have been conducted in partnership with the UN, with the United Nations, is to work on this pillar to try to influence policies and legislation. So what we see on the right below is the common declaration on incarceration, a common position on incarceration. Certain crimes and certain offenses for which there can be other ways of intervening besides incarcerating people, which are much more cost effective and achieving much better results. So this was launched when one of the strategies that was being followed was to decrease the number of imprisoned population, the number of inmates, and how can we implement certain measures of public health, among others. Now, another work that I consider as very important, developed in partnership with NODC, is this report that we prepared to raise awareness among governments on the need to include not only people that work in prisons or that live in freedoms in national vaccination programs. So in Portugal, this might seem unnecessary, but there are many countries in which this study was requested because there were many difficulties in negotiating with the governments for including this also, the vaccination of inmates, also international program. Now I'd also like to speak about this protocol here. This protocol was developed in partnership with Institute and explains in detail the mechanism we set up to surveil for epidemiological surveillance in prisons. So it includes many volunteers from member countries, and regularly it offers us 10 indicators that help us monitor the evolution of the situation. So this report has been used internally at WHO, and from this month onwards it will be made available in our website for those interested in. Then with these data, what do we do? We monitor the situation of the pandemic in prisons compared to what happens in the general community in the same region. And whenever we see there is a discrepancy, like you can see in this graph, you can see here the indicator in prisons went up significantly. So in these cases, we come in contact with the country and to understand what was the cause, and we try to help reverse the situation. Now, another thing that we have been doing in other fields is to try to deal more with vulnerable populations, because we consider that all the populations that is deprived of their freedom, they are vulnerable, but even within these vulnerable populations, there are others that are more vulnerable. So we have developed some work aimed, for instance, more at children deprived of their freedom. Another field which was not so commonly addressed or approached in prison settings is non-communicable diseases. So Professor Henrique spoke about this. So we have an elder population. So this makes us have to be more concerned with non-communicable diseases. So this is the first report that we are going to launch now on the weight of non-communicable diseases in prisons. Now we have a podcast in Russian that focuses on the care provided to people with cancer from the perspective of caretakers, researchers, and family doctors, and also from the point of view of those that live with the disease. And also in this specific field, we have developed work over the last year in order to reflect more and more the vision of those that are in prison settings. So we have some videos that try to give a voice to people in prison and tell us the moral of the story. So this one, for instance, speaks about, for instance, collaboration between different ministries and how can that improve healthcare in prison settings. This is another video, an interesting one, that speaks about the concept of health being a fundamental right that and no one can be deprived of that right. And the third video speaks about continuity of care and the need of improving the way the transition is made, so that when people leave the prisons, they still have access to health care and can continue with the treatment of their diseases. Now, obviously, all this work would not be possible without our partners. We are a team, a very small team, I must say. So everything we do counts on the active collaboration of all these entities. You can see here on the screen. And I will end just by informing you of what will be the first World Conference on Health in prison settings or in detention. It is a conference organized by the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, and for which the WHO is a sponsor, gold sponsor. It will be held in June, June this year, from the 27th to the 29th. And it would be very interesting that the Portuguese colleagues would also participate actively and send in papers. So I now end like this, and I thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you, Dr. Filipa, for your presentation, for the reflections that you brought. It is very clear the great work that WHO does and is doing in prison settings in the various countries, and also with the guidance that it has prepared in order to promote health in prison settings. I wonder if there are any questions, either from the participants in the audience or from the other speakers. Okay, otherwise, we will move to our third speaker, Dr. Rui Morgado. Dr. Rui Morgado, he is a doctor, a medical doctor. He is the clinical coordinator for prisons in the central and northern region of Portugal, and he is also the clinical head for the prison of Porto. Rui Morgado has some members of his team present here with him, namely Olinda Gomes, the deputy director for the prison of Porto, and Lucília Santos. He is the head of the prison guards of the prison of Porto. So, Dr. Rui Morgado, thank you very much for having accepted this challenge. Thank you very much for having been so kind with us when you hosted us at your prison. So on my own behalf and on behalf of my team, our research team, we want to deeply thank you for your kindness in opening your doors to us, and for the generous way you have held discussions with us. So you have the floor now. I think you are muted, so you have to connect your mic. First of all, I want to greet all of those present here. Second of all, I want to say that besides those that you said, we also have Mafalda Castro with us. She is the head of the team for the Center of Competences for Healthcare. She is the maximum, the highest responsible officer for health in prison settings. I want to thank you for your kind invitation, for being here. I want to thank for us researching health in prison settings. And first of all, I want to say one thing. When I was preparing my presentation, I thought of not showing any slides. But then Henrique Barros, when he made his presentation, he left an idea on what is the prison population. And I want to show you, first of all, and before anything else, how is the prison population in our country? How does it look like in our country? Because the population, the prison population that was presented by Professor Henrique Barros is the world prison population. But let me show you how it looks like in Portugal. I apologize for the slides being in Portuguese to those English speakers, but I will try to speak slowly for the interpreter to be able to follow me. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you perfectly, but something is down, he says. We don't see your slides, Professor. Let's see if I can show them. He is trying to share his screen, but he is not being able to. I think he has to be admitted as a co-host. I'm sorry. I think he has to be admitted as a co-host in order to be able to share his screen. Unless he is assigned as a co-host, you won't be able to share his screen, I think. Now we lost Dr. Rui Morgado. We can't hear him. Let's see if he comes back. I think he's frozen and we can't hear him. So now, while we wait for Dr. Rui Morgado to come back, maybe we'll give the floor to the next speaker, if you agree with me, so that we don't override our time while we wait for Dr. Morgado to come back. So thank you, Lucília Nunes, for being here with us. I would like to thank you very, very much for all the contributions that you have given us over time. So I deeply thank you for your contribution in the research projects that we have conducted so far. Lucília Nunes, she is a member of the Ethical Committee of the Polytechnical Institute of Setúbal. She is a member of the Ethical Committee of the University of Minho, and she was the Vice President of the National Ethical Committee for Health. So, Lucília, Professor Lucília, you have a difficult task now, because Professor Henrique already launched many topics for debate. Yes, I know, I will take advantage of them. We are going to speak about ethical issues for research involving prisons, and maybe you can answer some of the questions that were launched and some of the challenges that were launched by on the experimental studies that the ethical issues that experimental studies can bring up in prison settings. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your kind introduction. First of all, I want to thank everyone, those present here, because they are taking time from a Saturday morning to be here, and these reflections, I think they are very important. I want to thank Professor Henrique Barros, because he has shown a great concern for public health in prison settings, and I've learned so much with him. And it's important that we acknowledge when we learn and when we know about things that we don't know. So I'm not going to speak about barriers. I'm just going to speak about ethical issues. And I want to share with you some of the things that were brought up by Professor Barros, like the issue of dignity, privacy, and so on. So I will share my slides and try to speak slowly. It's very difficult for me to speak slowly. She says I have a hard time speaking slowly. As you know, slides are just a summary, so they need to be elaborated upon. So these slides are not different from others in sense that they are like a telegram. And when people were concerned with the language issue, so I I wrote them in 2 languages. Now, I was given only 15 minutes. This is like you are given a truck of oranges and you're asked to prepare a glass of orange juice. So you can see what I'm going to say is in English on the right side. And my first main question is coming since the 1960s is whether it is ethical to carry out research with inmates. This is the first major question. Do inmates have the autonomy to consent freely and in an informed way, so having in mind that they have been deprived of their freedom? Because for research, people have to consent, have to offer consent freely and in an informed way. So what are precautions that researchers should have when dealing with vulnerable groups such as the prison population? Are there ways to guarantee privacy within prisons? And what is the risk-benefit balance with the prison population as research subjects? So these are the first questions I would launch for us to move on. So first I will give you a general framework for research. So something that is used for research in general and for research in health that are absolutely basic. So I won't speak about declarations, principles. I will make a soft thing, and I will just report to 3 or 4 elements that I consider as most important for this question, which is to research within prison settings. So the 10 main concerns or recommendations by the Council of Europe. So this is nothing new. So we already have many considerations in general, but now with COVID we have more considerations. So the first thing is to always respect the principles of clinical research in human beings. So here we have the aspects related to the basic elements. And the Convention on Human Rights for biomedicine, it says that we are reporting to a general framework of people's rights, and so the recommendation from 2006 that was reviewed in 2020 is concerned with the application of rules in and standards in prison settings, especially concerning ethical and organizational aspects of healthcare in prisons that I have highlighted in yellow. And of the basic principles, there are two that are more important. All persons deprived of their liberty shall be treated with respect for their human rights. And number 5, that life in prison shall approximate as closely as possible to the positive aspects of life in the community. So these are the two main basic principles. Some decades away, we would exclude prisoners because they're vulnerable. We would exclude children because they were vulnerable. We would exclude pregnant women because they were vulnerable. So here we have this question, this persistent question, which is, if we include them, these vulnerable populations, then how do we ensure that all guarantees are ensured? So Portugal signed in 2001 by a decree of the President of the Republic, the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Dignity of the Human Being with regard to the application of biology and medicine, known as the Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine. Here we have the primacy of a human being. In the interest and the welfare of human beings shall prevail over the sole interest of society of science. We have equitable access to health care, the professional standards, and all the protection of persons undergoing research, which are the subjects of research. Nothing is new for you. And now I want to share with you an interesting discussion. Well, I was thinking if I would share this or not regarding the respect of autonomy. But then there was an opinion on coercive feeding of inmates on hunger strike. So I want to speak about this opinion because one of the main aspects was the assessment of autonomy, and this would bring up issues related to the respect for hunger strike or not. So the idea is that people that are in prison, they have rights. It's like someone who is ill or is in a hospital, they still have all their full rights fully. Now, another aspect is the good research practices. So we have the European Code for research. Well, this is basic, but it's important that we stress some element aspects and some concerns that come from the 1970s, the research involving prisoners that have evolved according to culture, according to the years. So this report has something very interesting to discuss, which is that within the U.S. context, inmates cannot not be seen as people that have autonomy or freedom. Now, as far as ethical issues, we must respect their dignity, their vulnerability, but these are not barriers. I call them issues, not barriers. So issues are questions that you raise in our research. So the formal guidelines for investigation, for instance, in Portugal, there was a little line on that slide. I don't know who did that. It was not me. In Portugal, since 2014, the clinical research law requires that there is a mandatory ethical review prior to starting any study. Now, here, clinical research is not clinical in the sense of medical. It is any research that has to do with people, with persons, either psychological, sociological, health point of view, and some of the usual criteria, like the value of research from the scientific and social point of view, how to recruit participants, what is the risk-benefit ratio, and if it's favorable, what procedures are associated with participation in the study, how do we explain to them and inform, how do they provide informed and voluntary consent, then how do we ensure anonymity and privacy, how do we ensure confidentiality, storage, and custody of data, and of course, if you see here, confidentiality and custody are separated. privacy, because privacy has to do with the privacy of data, and confidentiality is the obligation that researchers have of keeping those data confidential. Then the possibility of leaving the study without penalty and how to do so, and then how to trigger any complaints that are going on, or then how to ensure that if they undergo any risk, and then how to provide them insurance, and then respect for subject, because if I'm conducting a research, let's say psychological risk, then help people, telling them where can they go to, whom can they resort to if so the idea is that ethics has conducting research has an ethical metrics, and we cannot leave it aside, and there is a potential of discomfort, of risk in any type of research, and in this case of prison settings, it raises very, very specific issues that need to be assessed on a case-by-case basis and in each circumstance, because the general rules are basically very, very simple. Now here you see it in a very simplistic way, but most basic ethical issues are related to not causing harm, helping others, respecting truth, being faithful, being fair, allowing rational people to make free, informed choices, respect their privacy and confidentiality, and then ultimately, what do people that participate in this research, what do they gain? The environment is not an open one; it's very closed, extremely guarded. People are constantly surveyed. The life is very organized, planned, and regulated and programmed. So we have to see the potential impact upon research of this unbalance, and researchers must be always attentive, because continuously they must survey, monitor their study and the impact. And I would say that the pandemics also helped or has introduced new challenges for seeking participants' consent, especially when researchers use technology for remote interviewing. And then the thing of writing. And I'm moving away from my central topic, but it's very important that researchers are attentive to how they prepare their report, they write their report, because then this research, the proceeds will be, or the outcomes will be disseminated and widely known. So we have to be very, very careful about the way of writing itself, because it's an ethical act. So this was all I had to share with you. As you saw, I prepared very general slides, and some of them were connected to some questions that were raised by Professor Henrique. So look at each project, knowing that a research project is not the same as a clinical intervention, and this is probably one of the most difficult fields in Portugal. And we have a rule that is slightly different when we intervene in health, and the purpose of the research is to help us improve our healthcare and prepare guidelines. So people have to provide their consent for using their data. And now this is it, and so I'm available for any questions from your side. Thank you, Professor Lucília, for your intervention, for sharing with us your slides that make us think deeply on the subject. Now, we will eventually come back to you after the presentation of Marina. Marina is going to speak about a very practical case. So we will try to make a triangle between the challenges launched by Professor Henrique Barros on the way to knowing better the vulnerable settings, so that the results can be used for this population, and to what extent is it ethical, or what is the frontier that must be established between what the researcher proposes after the results that are obtained from the research. Considering the issues that were brought up by Lucília Nunes. I wonder if there are any questions, any specific questions so far on the presentations that were made. It seems like not. I would just like to say that this session is also being broadcasted through YouTube, so you can access this broadcasting through YouTube right now or later on, and the presentations will then be made available to all of you. So each participant will receive the presentations through our website or through email, so that you can have these presentations, okay? So now I would give the floor back to Dr. Rui Morgado. I think he's back with us. Dr. Rui Morgado, I can't hear you. I think you are muted. Okay, can you hear me now? Yes, yes we can. I apologize. There was a problem here with the internet in my area. Somehow it was down, but technology is just like this. Now let us see if I can share my screen. I have a different, he said, I have a different something, but he didn't say what. Can you see my screen now? Yes, yes, we can, perfectly well. Okay, so I have a different presentation, not the one I prepared, but in the 31st of December 2019, we had 12,793 inmates. Then in 2020, 4,357 new inmates came into the Portuguese prisons, and 5,738 left prisons. And so in the 31st of December 2020, we had 11,400 inmates. And why did we have such a huge reduction in the number of inmates between 2019 and 2020? Well, there was legislation published under COVID that released many inmates in Portugal. Now, our prison population includes mostly men, 10,600 men, and a minority of women, less than 800, just in the same proportion as in the rest of the world. 20% of our inmates are in prevention detention, so they haven't been yet convicted, and 80% have been convicted. Most of our prison population are Portuguese, as you can see here in blue, and in red it's foreign inmates. They are convicted for crimes against people. There's conviction for offenses connected to drugs are usually drug traffickers. And now here we see the schooling levels. 4% of people that are imprisoned are illiterate, totally illiterate. Then we have another 4% that do know how to read and write to some extent, so they only have elementary education. The other 95%, they have up to the third cycle of basic education. Our prison population is mostly aged between 30 and 39 years of age, but then above the age of 50, they are 24%. So this means that our imprisoned population is aging. We have some that are convicted for 3 to 9 years, mostly from 3 to 9 years of imprisonment, and we have 329 inmates that are convicted. They are below legal age. And just to end, giving you this profile of prisons in Portugal regarding infectious diseases, we have, this is data from 2020, 14% of inmates have a viral infectious pathology, of which 73% have hepatitis, 18% have HIV, and 9% HIV plus hepatitis. So this prevalence has been, as you can see in these bar graphs, has been stable over the last few years, over the last 3 years, although with the treatment that we have for hepatitis, it has decreased, especially C hepatitis. Now, I want to stop the sharing my screen. So, why do we need clinical studies with inmates? Well, because, especially because inmates help us have, or there is a vulnerable, it's a vulnerable population, a population that is very difficult to have it all together, and we can have it there. We know where it is, and so we have like a favorable context for that. Now, as far as clinical studies, I think they were not well seen, well regarded, namely what Lucília mentioned from the ethical point of view during the Second World War, and even after that. They were not well seen, these studies, because they were degrading from the human point of view. So we must always bear in mind when we conduct a study or a clinical research with inmates, how it can benefit the inmates themselves. This should be the main thing. And the other thing is that such benefit for inmates, is it directly for them? Because we know that our state is the ultimate responsible for the health of inmates. We are the ultimate responsibles for the health of inmates. So, will that study benefit such inmates, or will it benefit the other inmates? So we must think about this, and we must think that inmates, when they undergo studies, it must create gain for them, because otherwise people will tell us that we are choosing inmates for our studies because they are what we call the favorite inmates of the system. We know that first of all, we must understand whether inmates have the capacity to accept being part of the study. And the other thing that Lucília brought up, which is very important for us in terms of research with inmates, is confidentiality of data. So inmates are only deprived of their freedom. They are not deprived of anything else except what was determined by court. So they have the full right to confidentiality of their data, but just like all the general population. Another very important aspect when we conduct clinical studies. So I'm just leaving some clues, or bringing up some clues for us to discuss. There are many clinical studies that offer a remuneration. So is it legal to remunerate inmates also, or not? So is it that inmates don't want to join the studies, and they could join the studies not because of free consent, but because they will receive a secondary gain from taking part in this study, and that secondary gain can be in terms of decreasing their sentence, or conditional days out of prison. So should we find a way of remunerating inmates that take part in studies compared to others that don't take part in studies? I would say that there are 3 types of clinical studies regarding inmates or connected to inmates. One is biomedical research, not related to health and well-being of subjects. So these studies are generally studies with drugs, with new medications, and these studies should never be conducted with inmates. Now, I don't know, but is it that for a study that will not benefit the inmates themselves, is it valid to have their informed consent? they are a vulnerable population. So is it acceptable to accept their participation? Now we have medical research, biomedical research that tend to improve the health and well-being of inmates. So these are studies in stage 3, phase 3, biomedical studies of a different type. Then we have social and behavioral research, which tend to improve the health of inmates. So there are various types of studies that are conducted more conducted in prisons. They don't imply the use of medications. They don't imply anything connected to the inmates' health. They will just improve their conditions in terms of their behavior and their social side. We must think like therapeutical communities were started, and the validity of a therapeutical community was started with inmates in the US. So this valued very much many things, namely that presently we have throughout the whole world communities, therapeutical communities with individuals that are non-inmates. So can we conduct research that will improve the life of inmates and procedures within inmates and improve the programs to support inmates? So these studies are valid in my understanding. Now, studies that for me are or that should never be conducted in inmates is those in which we are testing medications that are not specific for inmates, and these are ethically unacceptable and unadjusted for such a vulnerable population. It is a population that we find everywhere. We know where they are. It's easy to get to them. It's easy to conduct a study. It's actually cheap for us because we just have to go to one place. We don't have to go after them, after the patients. We don't have to go after the participants of the studies. But for the ethical issues are very important. So these are just some clues I'm leaving here with you so that then we can discuss and further discuss on them. And I apologize for the interruptions that were caused by the technical side. Thank you, Dr. Rui Morgado, for your reflections, for your tips, and I think that you put on the table more challenges now for clinical research in prison settings. Some that we hadn't yet addressed in such a clear way, and I think they will be very interesting for the project that Marina is going to present right now. Now, this project will help illustrate what are the challenges found or that you have been speaking about in terms of conducting research in prison settings. So a proposal to move into action and move into research within prison settings within the population of inmates. So Marina Santos is a family doctor. She's taking her PhD at the University of Porto, the medical school, and she is going to speak about a research project that is going to be conducted in the prison of Porto. And so you have the floor now, Marina. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank all of those present here, and namely all the speakers for the great questions they brought up. So we have a lot of material to work on. Thank you all very much, namely all the participants following us. So as Firmino said, I took up this challenge, which is my PhD. Firmino is my guide in my PhD. So I have an example to show you how can we put into practice everything that we've been discussing so far. Now she says she's having a hard time moving the screen. So my project is on improving physical activity, improving quality of life of prisoners by proposing physical activity in prisons. And so I was invited to take part in this webinar by Professor Henrique Barros because of the topic I'm working on, because it can be an example for us to discuss the ethical issues related to research in prison settings. So I would start off my presentation by giving you a context of the project itself and its relevance. So we know that in the general population, exercise can improve the quality of life of individuals, but inside prisons, we only found two randomized clinical studies, as using the words of the former speakers, that there is a black hole in prisons. There's a lack of studies in this, and we also know that inmates are a population that have lifestyles that are not very healthy. Many of them are smokers, they consume drugs, and they suffer from sedentarism. So imprisonment should not just be seen as a deprivation of freedom, but it can also be seen as an opportunity to improve the quality of life of our prisoners in order to improve their health and also to promote their social reintegration and also reduce recidivism. So, as I said, there are very few studies in this field. So this project is an attempt to increase the number of studies that we have in this field, namely in Portugal. Now, our project was implemented in two prisons in Porto, the prison of Porto and the criminal investigation police prison. We will propose this study only for male inmates aged between 18 and 65 years. I won't list the exclusion criteria. This is just informative for those that have are curious about what are the exclusion criteria on this study. Now, our primary goal with this project is to test the effectiveness of a regular physical activity program so in regular means 3 times a week, 1 hour each day, to increase the quality of life of individuals detained in prisons compared to with standard of care procedures. The secondary goal is to test the superiority of physical activity programs based on street soccer practice in comparison with a multi-component training to improve their quality of life. And we also want to assess the effectiveness of physical activity program when compared to standard care procedures in prisons, namely reducing anxiety and depression, improving the quality of sleep, decreasing aggressive behavior, reducing disciplinary sanctions, and also in clinical terms also increase muscular strength, reduce blood pressure values, and reduce body mass index and waist circumstance. So we have 2 types of interventions. We will have a cross training for 1 hour 3 times a week, supervised by a physical education teacher in small groups of inmates. Each session will follow a predefined structure adjusted to each participant according to the assessment made by the physical education teacher. Then the second intervention will have similar model, so 1 hour 3 times a week, but it will be based in recreational football, also supervised by a physical education teacher, and in small groups with 25 inmates at the most. We have a control group. Our initial idea is to compare the normal procedures that are happen in prisons. So because usually all inmates have daily access to 2 hours of physical activity without any guidance by a physical education teacher. This is the main difference. So they will act freely. So this is the design of the study for you to better understand our project. So the participants will be randomizedly divided into 2 groups, one for cross training and one for recreational football. and then the other is the control group. And within the intervention, the group under an intervention, they will have two groups, and in general they will be randomized into two groups, the intervention group and the control group. And so in both intervention groups, they will have physical activity 3 times a week, 1 hour each session. So we will monitor every 6 months and every 12 months, and then after 18 months, and then after 2 years. So the duration of this project is for 2 years. So as was said here, there are several ethical issues, several ethical issues, because it's a very vulnerable population, first of all. So the conclusion is that the control group is disadjusted to this population, is not well adjusted. So we thought of 2 alternatives. The first alternative would be to implement health sessions or health education sessions for all participants in the study, whether the control group or not. Then the second option would be to fully remove the control group. For you to better understand the idea, I show you this design. The first option here, you can see, the implementation of health education sessions for all participants, so the control group would be an active control group, let's say. So they would have full access to these health education sessions that would last for 40 minutes every 2 months. So this is the first option. The rest of the study would remain the same. Everything else would remain the same as I showed you before. The second option would be to just completely remove the control group and just have the intervention group divide into 2 types of intervention. So the cross-training and the recreational football. So now I would end here, and I would be open now for discussion, and I would ask you for your help in order to help me move forward with my project, which would be the best option. I would like to know. Thank you, Marina. Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting project, and I think it closes the triangle between what are the challenges brought up by prison settings that were brought up by Professor Henrique Barros and Dr. Rui Morgado, and then relational aspect, and then the challenges, ethical challenges, complex ethical issues that were brought up by Lucília Nunes when we conduct research in prison settings. So we would now open up for discussion. Now, Marina proposed that, considering the benefits for users and considering that users have the capacity to accept in a free and informed way the participation in that study, it is ensured that there would be no influence in the routine of these prison settings. And what is your opinion on what should be the approach of the epidemiological design that would bring the best commitment in terms, the best balance between advancement of knowledge and the ethical dimension of the project? So this project should be seen as an experimental study with a classical control group, or maybe with a control group that takes an active part also in the study, or ultimately if the control group should be removed altogether if not considered as relevant. So I would ask Lucília. It seems like she was requesting the floor. Okay. It seems I wanted to say something. I would like to ask Marina to tell me what is the goal of your research. What is the question? What is the question of this research that you're trying to answer? Because that makes all the difference. And then I would also like to say that remuneration in Portugal, the participation in research is free of remuneration. People are not remunerated for participating in studies, okay, in Portugal. This is the practice in Portugal, okay? I'm just telling this, Rui Morgado. It is very, very clear in terms of clinical research and in terms of ethical questions that it is completely free. People participate without any remuneration to take part in remuneration. They are only reimbursed of any expenses that they might have with displacements, connected to the study or so on. Only that. So I want to ask Marina to please tell us what is the question, the research question, what is the goal that you are trying to achieve with this research. That is very relevant. What you want to achieve? Well, the primary goal of this project is to test the role of physical exercise in improving the quality of life of inmates. So, to see if the regular practice of physical activity, if with that we can improve the quality of life of inmates. For that, we will conduct a 6-month assessment, namely with questionnaires and so on. So, the intention of the design is to test the effectiveness of the program and to improve the quality of quality of life of inmates. So the control group is used by researchers. Is in the third group, the group in which everyone gains, even those that are not part of group 1 or group 2. Yes, for improving their health, because ultimately it is an opportunity for intervening in terms of literacy of health. It has potential gains for everyone, and it seems a good example because it's not an experimental framework, because the experimental frameworks need control groups or comparing groups. So compare with what? Compare both. Compare with the cross training with the recreational football. They can compare because the question is testing the effectiveness of a program. And if I take out the control group, the comparing group, if I use a comparing group or not. So I think we should focus on the intention of the study, because the outputs then will be connected to the intention, to the answer, or to the goal. And randomization. I have a second question. I'll show you the slides, Marina. Now, the randomization is conducted how? You're talking about the initial stage? No, you said that it would be a randomized control study. And the randomization, how is randomization conducted? Now, Marina is saying that there are two randomizations. The first randomization is to divide inmates between the control group and those that will take part in the study. And the second randomization will be to divide the participants in the study in group 1 of cross training, and the second group, which is recreational football. So how do you choose them? That was my first question. How to choose them? Asked Professor Rui Morgado. No, you don't choose them, says Lucília Nunes. You randomize them. They are randomized, so they're not chosen. Well, that was one of the questions that we had in the beginning. Yes, the initial selection. Well, because unfortunately we cannot just say that we will randomize among all the inmates that we have in these two prisons. So the first question is, how do we select those? Will it be based on wings within the prison, or propose the project to a first group of inmates and then successively propose it to other groups until we have a number of participants that is appropriate for the sample that we want to have? However, as far as I understood, and please, Dr. Rui, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that there are differences in the various wings, because the type of inmates in each wing have certain specificities that might then affect the study and the selection. Okay, my question on how you conduct this randomization has several intentions, because the question is, if I want a sample, if I randomize this because I want a sample, okay, but the idea is, how do I randomize, let's say, do I use a random org, a computer program, or do I use it based on a list that I get from the institution? Do I present the project first, and everyone hears about it, and then we randomize afterwards? So the criteria should be analyzed, because the project can be presented to all inmates. I don't know how, and then we identify which ones will be randomized, or do we just inform those that are randomized about the study that's going to be conducted? So do you understand my question? The question is, how is the project presented to or introduced to the inmate population, and how do they have access to the randomization criteria? Because inmates will ask questions. So why Manuel was chosen for group A or B? So this can create issues among the population, the prison population. You see, so these were my initial comments. So these are just my initial comments after looking at the design of your study, and starting from the beginning, which is, how is it being proposed, or how it will be proposed to the population, and how it will be disseminated. So the choice, if you will present to all of them or to just a few of them, and how do you conduct the recruiting of participants, that is very, very important. Go, Marina, you can take the floor. I will take out my hat as a moderator, and I will give you some clues on the selection of participants and randomization. So we have to randomize participants between the different arms, considering their existence after the users were were informed about the study, showed interest in participate, and signed the informed consent to participate in the study. So the idea is that randomization will happen only after not only they were informed about the project and they expressed interest in taking part in it. Otherwise, if we randomize in a general way without any information, this would compromise a balance between the characteristics of the several arms of the study. So the idea in the proposal is that randomization should only happen after eligibility happened and after they signed the informed consent to take part in the study. Having said this, so randomization, the implementation of the randomization, one of the ways of conducting it is by using an appropriate software for randomization, which can be random.org, or there are many tools for that. That can allow us to randomize participants. It's not defined by the participants, but through a platform used for that purpose. So thank you. That makes all the difference. Because you are not considering the possibility of not being there not being enough participants, like in the case like no one wants to take part in the study. But okay, so it is among those that have already been considered eligible, those that have signed informed consent, and only afterwards do you select your sample. Okay, I understood. Thank you. Now I want to be the bad guy. I want to ask, how will we select those that will be eligible before randomizing them? Is them that choose themselves? It seems, as far as I understood, it's them that choose themselves, without any intervention by the administration? I don't know. That's what I understood, says Lucília. I don't understand well. Okay, so we're having this interesting role of being the devil's advocate. Okay, now it seems like Henrique Barros has his hand raised. Okay, you can speak, Professor. Well, I want to stress something that Lucília said. when people ask me, this might be a foolish question, but when people ask me, what is your main question or ethical question in research, I usually say is the quality of science. And the quality of science starts with the question. As Lucília said, what is the question you're trying to answer with your project? But I want to say something else, if you allow me, which is, it's not clear, and it has never been clear for me. Let's say, looking at this as an onion of which we take out the several layers one by one. Do we want to conduct research in prison settings? Yes, that's relevant. We want that. We believe in it. Now, we have a good question. Now, to have a good question is not that certain. When we are, because I see many questions here, and this is what concerns me. The first question is it that this intervention of physical activity, this program of physical activity, will it be useful for people that are imprisoned? This is the question. And then there should be another question before that. Is it useful unequivocally for people that are not imprisoned? So let us see if it is also useful in a particular situation, which is when people are deprived from freedom. So it's like this is not a drug, not a medication. This is an intervention, a more psychosocial type of intervention. So it might not work in these circumstances. And this question seems a good question. It seems like a good question. But here we are closing the problem. And the answer is the external validity is for inmate populations. And the first thing we need to prove is that this comparison is already made, has already been made. We already know, because otherwise, why are we comparing two different things? It's because we don't know that outside prisons which is better, or is it because we want to know which is the best within prison settings, knowing that both work and both are good? So this is very important for me, because regardless whatever we want to imagine, Rui brought it up and made it very clear. There are many tensions of people and people that know these prison settings. They know it very, very well. All models are redone in terms of social relations and so on in prison settings. So taking part in something like this can be seen both as a extraordinary opportunity of having some freedom, of imagining side effects, or something that I cannot even conceive fully, or on the other hand, almost have an additional sentence can be seen, like, I want to play football in a certain way, and I'm being told to play football in a totally different way, which is with certain rules that I don't want to follow. So, to me, and I would end here in order not to extend this too much. So I think this is very important, it's very interesting, but we have to make it very, very clear, in my opinion, that by going to prisons, we want to do something good for people. We want to actually help them. And Lucília spoke about something that's very important, and we have dwelled on that, and which concerns me a lot, and it came back with COVID, and she has also dwelled on this, is why don't we use pregnant women in the clinical trials? If pregnant women are, if they are users of many, many reasons, of a huge amount of medications that are never tried in a controlled way, or children, why don't we use children more? But these pregnant women that are using these medications is because they might need them. So here we have the same issue. we are using, well, it's a similar question. In pregnancy, we have the problem of controlling things that we don't know, what might happen to the fetus, for instance, or what can happen to that child that's going to be born. But here it's a limitation in terms of the person's decision or the person's freedom. Do they actually represent the general individuals? Because in order to treat hepatitis or TB or HIV, we usually don't conduct these trials in inmates, and we use people that don't have the constraints of inmates, but they have the exact same disease. So if we want to test something that is good for people that are in certain circumstances, we must use these people that are in these circumstances. Let's say if I'm testing a medication for someone that is pregnant, so I must test it in pregnant people. We cannot test it in people that are not pregnant. So I don't have an answer for this, but the design should be as narrow as possible in order to prove that it is good for the people that are imprisoned. Can I say something? Ask Dr. Rui Morgado. Yes, please. Okay, it's the following. Henrique spoke about a person that didn't want to play football this way and wanted to play some in a different way. And I can bring up another question. This is why I was talking about this choosing the initial group. And the person that is chosen to play football is the person that is known within the system or within the prison that he collaborates with the system, and he's put next to those that don't collaborate. So the idea is that we try, and we've discussed this once, and we've discussed this twice, and we will keep discussing it, I'm sure, before the study is actually implemented, because ethical questions are very important. Ethically, why should I choose A and not B? Individual A, not individual B. And we're not talking about randomization of the sample. We are talking about in the 880 inmates that we have in the prison of 𝗍𝗿𝗁𝗍𝗁𝗍. How do I choose a group of 100 to then randomize them? Then we have a problem. The control group, and that's the problem I want to ask next from ethical point of view. The control group, how will it be chosen? It will be randomized, and then we will have a control group. So we are being biased on a number of on a certain number of inmates against the others, because one group of inmates will be conducting the same physical activity that they used to conduct before without any guidance by a physical education teacher. So I think that what we need to do is see that after the study is over, after we draw the conclusions, we need to continue it to give the same benefit to all inmates that might want to take part in physical exercise. Let's imagine that we find eligible, even maybe because they think they will have secondary gains. Let's consider that we will have 800 eligible individuals, but we will never be able to have 800 individuals following the program. Even if we divide them into two groups, we won't have resources for that, for all 800 to engage in physical activity. So for this, the ethical committees, the ethical committee for the study must think about it seriously, because we see in all articles and papers that we read, and Lucília gave me a book that is a report on by a committee from the US on that, just on that. And so we must think, how will this help the inmates' health? This is the most important aspect. How it will help the inmates' health. in the general sense of health, not in the strict sense of health. We have to think about this because it will bring about some hypothesis. And if, when we say that, after randomizing the sample, we say, this individual that wanted to be part of the program without physical activity. So if we have to offer the person something, this person signed the informed consent to join the study, but then he will not engage in physical activity because he will part of the control group. He will not participate in the programmed physical activity. So let us imagine a type of physical activity that is totally different, besides being the programmed physical activity so that they can do something. Well, maybe then the study will be biased. So I think this has to be thought from the ethical point of view in a very deep way, because when we create the eligible group, we are creating something that the control group won't have. Or otherwise, we get the eligible ones, we just choose eligibles for the group that we want to conduct a study on, I mean the guided physical activity, and then the control group will be all the other inmates that don't take part in the study. All the other inmates that belong, that are imprisoned in this prison, they are the control group. They are the general control group. They are. I think this would be the best way of designing the study, because then we won't have to ask all the others if they want to participate or not in the study. Okay. Now I will give the floor to Filipa because she's raising her hand, and she can have her take on the challenges that were brought up. Can you hear me? Yes, perfectly well. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. It's me that have a problem with my headset. So I think we have many questions here. One thing that Professor Rui Morgado brought up is that physical activity is general, is good for general population and general for quality of life in general. Now, regarding the two interventions that are being tested, which one will be the best? I don't know, but maybe Filipa, after she reviews the literature, maybe she can answer that. She's getting cut off every now and then. I'm sorry. I can't hear her now. I can't hear her. I'm so sorry. I cannot follow what is being said by Filipa. Now, there's another question that was not addressed, which is exclusion or non-inclusion of inmate populations in research. So, to what extent, when we are trying to protect this population, are we actually excluding them from certain opportunities that might exist? Now, obviously, there are many stories, even connected to access to medications, that are well described already. But here it is an intervention with potential benefits that are clear for health. So, here, excluding this population is also depriving them from opportunities. And I say this because cross-training and recreational football is not something that happens normally in prison contexts. It's not. It's a common activity. And something that characterizes prisons very much is how or can the prisons be an opportunity for the promotion of health, or a good setting for promoting of health. And the last point has to do with this last question of eligibility criteria. I always saw, but Marina can help me answer this. What is defined is that the individual shows interest, and then what the clinical body sees is to what extent some will have to be excluded for medical reasons, exclusively medical reasons that can prevent them from engaging in this type of physical activity because it might put their health at risk. But I think besides that, there is no other criteria for exclusion. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for your inputs. Marina, would you like to take the floor and make your comments on the various challenges and questions that were brought up so far? Marina, do you want to come in? She is muted. I think Marina is muted. Sorry, I was not being able to activate my mic. Okay, yes. Several things were brought up related to this project, but now, picking up on what Filipa said, we are offering a benefit to the inmate population, and so depriving them from this opportunity, I don't think it's the best solution. So, my proposal is in order for us not to have a control group that has no intervention at all, I didn't really understand your opinion, namely of Rui Morgado, on on how to apply health sessions or sessions for improved health, so that we can have a benefit for all inmates while still having a group that could be compared to those that access to physical activity. Now, considering all the alternatives that we considered in our team, this is the one that seemed the best one. So I would also I would like to understand what are the limitations, and if you think this is not viable in a prison settings, that we implement sessions for on physical activity for improved health, which will bring about benefits to all inmates. Of course, we will always have this difficulty of inmates that will prefer to be in the group that has access to physical activity, but it was a kind of a compromise that we were able to make. But I would like to have your opinion on this aspect of the study in particular. Can I speak? Can I say something? I'm sorry, I'm always the bad guy. Well, because I work in prisons for many, many years, and I'm always the bad guy. Let me say the following. I would design, if you agree, and this is a tip I'm launching here for you. I would design it like this. And we have discussed this already, okay? So, eligible are all inmates in the prison, imprisoned, point, full stop. From here, we will take out those that clinically are not eligible for physical activity. This is number 2. So then we have the sample for all eligible ones. So none of them had heard about anything. We didn't offer them anything. They don't know about anything. Okay. Now, we take all these guys, and I apologize for speaking like this. And so this is the eligible group. Now, we will randomize this eligible group, those that we want for arms 1 and 2 that will be under intervention. And then only here will we only then will we speak to them about the project and ask for their informed consent. And those that want, okay. Those that don't want, okay. And those that don't want will be part of the arm that don't have physical activity. And the sessions for promotion of health should continue for everyone, and they are important for everyone and beneficial for everyone. Now, then we will have a randomized sample of all eligible ones, all individuals that are in this prison house and don't have medical issues that prevent them from from engaging in physical activity. Let's say I have an inmate, 91 years old, that has health issues, and he will never be eligible from the clinical point of view. So then we have a sample that is, in my opinion, ethically the most appropriate one, because we are offering all of them something that is the same, which is promotion of health through physical exercise. In some individuals, after randomizing the sample, we will offer also training, so monitored or guided training if they want. So, and then we can draw conclusions. So physical activity is important. Yes, in 𝗍𝗁𝗁𝗁, in our prison, we have physical activity as much as possible. We have a physical education teacher that works with us, as you all know. He is a permanent staff member. But we have to think like this. I will not ask, and this is what I want to say, I will not ask an individual to sign an informed consent to be part of a program that will have cross-training and recreational football, and then I say, no, you cannot be part of it because you belong to the control group. You see? I think the control group should be all other inmates that are not part of the program. And this is how we should randomize. So all are eligible, except those that have clinical conditions that don't allow them to. And out of all of those that are eligible, let's say in 𝗍𝗁𝗁𝗁 we have 800 inmates. All of them are eligible. Now, we take out, I'm talking about an imaginary group. Let's say 100 have a medical condition, so we take them out. So we have 700. So we randomize the sample from these 700. So Rui Morgado may be trying to organize our thoughts and the way of working in the future. Let me make a brief summary of what was said. So what Professor Dr. Morgado is proposing, no, I'm just giving some clues. So basically, you are offering a pragmatical approach considering almost all individuals, and considering eligible all of those that are in the prison, and then inviting them all to take part, and then those that accept to take part will be randomized among all of those. So, Marina, could you comment on this now? Can you show us option 2 again? Okay, so option 2 here shows, so this will ensure that no one is deprived from taking part of the intervention, if they want to be part of the intervention. So all of those that want to be part of the intervention, they will be part of the intervention, then they will be randomized, and there is no exclusion criteria except for a formal except for not being able to take part because of their clinical condition or medical condition. Yes. Give me just a minute to give. This is a 12 months program. Now, another counterindication is people that are in prison for less than 12 months. Let's say someone that within 6 months or 10 months or 9 months will leave the prison. So, besides those that have physical, a clinical condition, we should also consider as non-eligible those that will leave the prison before the 2 years. Because my project is for 2 years. Okay, let me discuss this. The project lasts for one year, and then the follow-up of another year. So the time aspect should be another filter for choosing the eligible ones. I'm not sure if it should be 1 year or 2 years. Well, that can be discussed. But I think that those that are in the prison for less than the duration of the study will be non-eligible, unless we can consider that they can leave in the middle of the program. Yes, because they have the right to drop out from the study. No, all of them have the right to drop out of the study. No, but we know that which ones will be drop out from the study because they will be released from prison. So they will automatically drop out. Okay, now as for information, think about this, because now I understand the practical counterindications, and I was touched by this thing that you make an offer, then some are excluded. But then how do you inform them? And how do you define who will be informed about the project? Because that's also a delicate matter. Now, there's this point of the time in prison is also a relevant one. Now, I didn't know whether I should present the project to groups of inmates, in small groups, in order to give them opportunities to ask questions, to ask for clarifications about the project. So hold a session in which we would explain the whole procedure to them, the control group, the existence of a control group. They wouldn't have the possibility of choosing which group they would be part of, because that would be at random. And then we'd offer them a possibility of asking questions. Of course, we would give them a leaflet with everything explained in detail about the project in writing. And then we would give also the informed consent for them to sign. And then those that would accept to take part, they would sign the informed consent. And we would then present this to several groups until we would have the number of participants, until we would have the 424 inmates that we want. Now, the question of their time in prison, we had already considered the possibility of including this as part of the exclusion criteria, that they would leave the prison before the end of the study. Can I say something? Look, now I still have a concern. The research question is to know what is the best intervention. Well, the genuine question is to understand whether that intervention is an actual one. Is it better to have an intervention or not have any intervention? No, but if I have two interventions, then that question doesn't make that question doesn't make sense. Because if it is something against placebo, then I can compare cross-training with business as usual. Okay, it's like the placebo. But if I have two different types of intervention, what I want to answer is whether cross-training is better or whether recreational football is better. You see? Yes, that is a secondary goal, the secondary goal of this research. No, I think you're being too ambitious with the study. And if you're too ambitious, then I think it would be easier if you start in a simple way, in a simpler way. Let's say, for instance, look, you know what? For those following us, if they are experienced with interventions in prisons, what we are saying might seem might seem like it doesn't make sense. But in Portugal, as far as I know, maybe João and Rui can help me this, but in Portugal we don't have any experience in this. We have no experience in this. So I would imagine that I think it would be more useful and safer and simpler. And don't forget this saying of keep it simple, KISS, keep it simple, KISS. Imagine this like a Lego with different parts. And the first part of the Lego would be to come to a prison. And this is just an example, okay? Come to a prison and say, look, dear guys, dear friends, we have someone here that can come here and offer you training on this, that, and that. So who is interested? Okay? Just like that. And then people say, okay, I'm interested, I'm not, this and that. And then of those that are interested, then you could say, look, who would accept to take part in a study on quality of life before we study. We take the part in the study, and then in the end. And those that would accept, they would be part of it. And then those that wouldn't, they would just do business as usual. So is there bias here? Okay, there is bias, but life is like this. And then we would say, okay, only 400 accepted. Who were they? Well, they were the younger, they were the ones that had sentences more like this or more like that. So, and then after this part of this piece of the LEGO is fulfilled, then we would try a more complex piece. And then the last answer could be, what would be the best way of intervening in prison context, in prison settings, in order to improve the quality of life of people there? Or until we come to a different conclusion. Let's say for men below 40, it's better to play recreational football. For men above 40, cross-training is better. Or people with higher education, formerly with more education, A is better than B, or this or that, whatever. So I think that you are being, and forgive me for this, don't take me wrongly, because you know how much I love you, but I think you are using your mind of living outside the prison, and you're taking it into the prison. You don't yet know how it looks like in prison settings. And let me underline something else, emphasize something else. Before that, it's very important that as much as possible within the rules and possibilities and so on, of having people in these settings, knowing that life in prisons is what it is. Let me just say the following. There used to be a joke in the past that would say the following. It was like a private joke of epidemiologists, which was, what is the difference between toxicology and epidemiology? And the answer was, in epidemiology, the animal comes out of the cage. So we have to think of this knowing that the human being is in the cage, inside the cage. Let me say something, says Rui Morgado, as far as eligibility and exclusion criteria. Are you thinking of exclusion criteria connected to age while keeping the study like this? Dr. Morgado, I would give just the opportunity to Joana Ribeiro, and I will try to formalize the proposal of what Dr. Henrique is saying in terms of gaining experience, and so we would present a experimental work, an initial assessment, and then an intervention after the initial assessment, and this way making the study into a single arm that would be the object of randomization. So, Joana, based on your experience in prison settings, maybe you can say something. Hello, good morning. Thank you, Professor Henrique, for your kind words. Thank you, all of you. Let me say something. There was something said. We were discussing something here that Rui Morgado said, that we keep, whether we exclude or not, those inmates that will leave the prison before the end of the project. So we have discussed that, but because in the beginning they don't know how long they will last, and we will get some doubts from them, so this would help in our discussion. So we will assume that everyone can participate, and then there's this possibility of dropout, and if they drop out, they will have to, if they leave the prison, they will have to leave the project, of course. But the prisons are like this, and so prisons have this this issue. They have this issue of those that are there, and then they leave the prison. But still, while they are there, even if they leave before the end of the study, they have an opportunity to participate in the study because it's good for them. So we discussed that. Okay, that is a decision that has been taken on before you start the study. We always know that we will lose part of the sample. That happens in all studies. We all know that and in prison settings, that's what happens also. We lose elements from this individual, from the sample, because they leave the prison. And even sometimes you have people that are sentenced for a larger period, but then somehow their sentence is shortened and they leave the prison before it was expected. That happens also normally. Now, regarding the discussions we've had already, I want to say the following. What was connected to what you brought up, that we expose everyone to this possibility, and the idea is that if we offer this possibility to everyone and we speak about the promotion of health, we want to give everyone the opportunity that something will happen, that they will be able to participate in something, that they will take some benefit from the project. And this is why we had this session of educational health. So it was in that sense that in the beginning the project was aimed more at only those that wanted to take part in physical activity. It was not aimed at the full or the whole population of inmates. And we didn't know that if we could cover all of them, of all eligible would want to participate. Would we be able, in terms of space, in terms of management, would we be able to have them all in the study if everyone would want to participate? So this was also brought up during our discussion. Now, the idea of considering promotion of health was to consider that even if they would not want to take part in the intervention, they would still have the benefit. So everyone would get some benefit from the project itself. So this is why this idea came up. But yes, I understand what you're saying, that to get there to them, not in such an academic way, so have an approach that is more natural to a population that is a bit different. But I also know, and based on my experience, as Dr. Morgado was saying, and in smaller settings, that if they have the opportunity, this opportunity, it can have a very interesting benefit, and I understand that. So we know that physical activity is always beneficial. That is more than described, is more than studied, is more than proven. But now how we approach it or not, I think it's very important. So the idea is to cover all of them and to see to what extent can we then offer everyone this intervention. In terms of logistics, in terms of resources, in terms of space. So we have to think this and discuss this. Think about this and discuss this. So, Joanna, just to make it clear for me, because it can be a big thing. So what I'm trying to say is that we can conduct this experience, we can acquire knowledge in many different ways. But all of them are imperfect. The problem is to know whether we are attentive to the imperfections or not. And naturally, in prisons also, there are problems at the time of having their meals. Who takes their meal first, who takes in the end. So this logic can also come into this. So is it better to have imperfect knowledge, but that helps us grow and improve, or and the readers or science then will understand that knowledge is imperfect because it cannot be more perfect than that, and they are concerned with that. So naturally, they will not all be able to take advantage of the intervention, but then there are the natural mechanisms of the day-to-day that will leave some out. So it should be like a study nested within an activity. So, Dr. Henrique, let me ask a question. Let me say something. Ask you a question for those that don't know much about this. What would be your suggestion, your objective suggestion? Is it instead of making an initial presentation to everyone, and then after this presentation we would want to know, we would ask them who wants or not? So in practical terms, what are you suggesting? No, I would suggest something like this. Now it needs to be matured more, but let's say prison A. We come to prison A and we bring everything that we have. We say, in this prison we are going to conduct a study. Do you want to play football, for instance? We want to propose. You want to play football?
who is interested in playing football? And then people would say, I am. Okay, then these that say that I'm interested in playing football, let's say 200, and you consider that only 100 can play. So you say, okay, let's first use the first 100, and then next we will get to the second 100, because they will understand that not everyone can go to the football pitch at the same time. So then you would have to manage it. And that's, imagine that you can only start with 100. So these 100 would come and play football. And then you would say, of you, who wants to answer this questionnaire before starting to play football, so that we can see whether football is good for your life or not. And then you would have 70 that will accept. And then we would play with these 70, or would conduct a study with these 70. And then they'll say, after a few months, and because of the transitional nature of life in prisons, or whatever, then we would say, okay, now of the 70 that say they accept, 70 would play football, and then after 3 months or 6 months, only 50 are answer the questionnaire. So, okay, we have 50 that answer the questionnaire in the beginning and in the end, and let's see how it works. Because here is not just the intrinsic assessment or evaluation of the intervention, but it's also the evaluation within a certain context, and this can be useful also. This is just my suggestion. I don't think it's better. I think, in my mind, I think this is a choice I would make. Well, we can't say that this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. No. Maybe because I'm of age, I would think something like this, something with a more practical approach. I think it's time to leave, isn't it? Well, it's almost 12:30. Let me just say something more before we give the floor back to Luciana. So, using the methodology we have, and would we only have one arm of our study? Well, that was one of the initial possibilities that we were discussing. Only have one arm of the study, and then we would say those that want to engage in physical activity in a controlled way, you take part in the study, and those that want to engage in physical activity on your own without any monitoring, so you conduct it, you engage in your own way. And so then we would see what were the benefits, or what are the benefits of engaging in a monitored or a guided physical activity. I think this is not a webinar any longer. This is just a conversation that's going on, a discussion that's going on. No, I'm in favor of simplicity, and so a PhD thesis have a tendency to being very complex. And then we don't leave it ever. We are just there, making it more and more complex. No, I like the idea of nature being simple. Nature likes to be simple, and so simplicity. So being simple is very important. And I was listening. I was thinking, okay, this is like a study for a study that we have before and after the intervention, more than an experimental study or quasi-experimental study to create a new knowledge within the prison settings. Of course, I would like. So doing this within a PhD thesis is a challenge, is an adventure. So I want to compliment you for that. But don't make your life complex. Choose an easy design, a simple design that would answer your research question if there is evidence on something. So if you already have it, so don't go after it again, because it will be redundant. Now, the fact that someone can gain something, that is interesting, but then I don't know what is the background of that population compared to other studies. If you have experience on studies like this, but my appeal is to simplicity, and then also consider whether there are studies in this context or not, and what is the preparation that is done, or the prejudice or stereotypes that the population already has regarding research conducted in that type of setting. And I wish you all the best. I will be looking forward towards the outcomes of your study and to the draft report that you will prepare. And I hope that we will all learn and we will all help improve the life of people in prisons and of people in general, because that's what we are looking for. We are looking for improving the lives of people in prisons, and I hope that you can fulfill the study, but while being ambitious, because it's good to be ambitious, to remain simple and do what is possible. Because if you remain simple and consider what is possible, then it is useful. Now, trying to wrap up, this is Firmino Machado speaking now, because I think that the idea is that it's more consensual, and that will be our working plan. So see this study as a study before and after, so an invitation for people to take part in a pragmatic way, in an inclusive way, of populations within prison settings, for all those who want to take part, and then after make a presentation, and then those that want to take part, they will have an initial assessment before they start the activity, and then in the end they have another assessment, at least, of course, for those that agree with it, to see the effects of the physical activity, and then if we are not able to implement it fully in one go, so then to have different moments to implement it, so that we can cover all the population that wants to take part in the intervention and not leave anyone out. Of if they want to take part. So these would be my main notes to try to wrap up and to try to create some cohesion between the suggestions that were brought up. Now, of course, there would be much more to say, but for us to try to end within reasonable time, I want to now end off by thanking the speakers very, very much. Also, thank the professionals that will participate with us in this intervention, and thank all participants that are following us both in Portugal and abroad for your participation here in this session and this webinar, and we hope that in this way we are contributing towards having better knowledge, more knowledge, and also to improve the lives of this population and serve them better. So thank you very much. I wish you a great weekend, and thank you for having been here with us all this time. Thank you. I wish you a great weekend, all of you. Now everyone is saying bye-bye.